Hello. So, I think I'll probably try to stop saying this episode was a milestone episode because I seem to be saying it about just about uh, every one of them that it's a milestone episode from my young television education time. Um, the first of these two that I'm about to talk about was one of the eye-opening ones that, like, wow, I never thought of it that way, and that really makes a lot of sense, and I'll never look at that the same way again. And the other is a little on the ridiculous side, but it's one of the Halloween episodes, and it's one of two that stick out as kind of haunted house uh, episodes. The other one is a haunted theater episode, but same principle. This one literally a haunted house and also a haunted museum. Um, and I've got a soft spot for any Halloween special of any show that I watched growing up. Uh, at least those that shows that I also have a soft spot for. So I'll just get to it. All Dried Up is the desert episode, and um, when it first aired. Let's see when it first aired, October of 1994. So for me, even though I hadn't seen either of these movies yet, desert essentially meant those long panning shots that you see in movies like Lawrence of Arabia or the Brendan Fraser version of The Mummy, and desert just sand and dunes and like a beach, but no water on one side and no civilization on the other side, just the beach part, just the sand. And the beaches that I went to growing up did have plant life, but that's not what in my youngest years I took away from beach experience. Um, so it's called All Dried Up. I may have already said that. And uh, basically, the premise is the class is making a desert diorama. They've got a big table filled with sand. They've put representative cactuses and rocks, cacti and rocks into it. And um, Phoebe puts stuffed animals that represent desert animals into it. And then Carlos goes off on a whole, but it's too uh, dangerous in the desert. It's too hot and dry, and it's not sustainable. It's not a place for life, for living things, even though cacti are living things, um, and and scares Phoebe. Just really just kind of uh, makes her just terrified for the lives of the animals that she knows are there. And this is kind of an episode that is dependent on the little kid view of the world of this is the first I'm hearing of it, therefore this is the first time uh, that it is a thing about which something must be done. Phoebe decides to. She says the whole at my old school we would have formed a committee and done something. Her classic line at my old school, this or that, and formed what is it? Students Against uh, dry deserts or something like that. She wants to save the animals in the desert as though they need saving. And Ms. Frizzle, of course, knows that this is ridiculous, but goes along with it because it's an opportunity for a field trip to the desert to teach the kids a thing. And in this particular episode, Arnold is ready because he just assumes we're going to class, we're going to learn about the desert, we're going to take a field trip to the desert. I'm going to be prepared. And he's got this huge purple backpack with all the regulation desert gear, he says. He's got a little booklet that by the end it seems to be suggested that the booklet was written by Ms. Frizzle, perhaps specifically for Arnold. Um, and so they go to the desert to fix it. And I wrote down Phoebe's stance is that nature is not fair. And one of the first things we see when they get off the bus in the desert, we see a buzzard representing things in the desert die on top of a dead thing, the skull of what would seem to be an ox. And it's a classic Western, Western movies would have the ox skull, the big skull with the horns. I don't know that oxen are desert animals, and those westerns are mostly about ranchers and who have ox, who have cows and things like that. But this is supposedly a wild desert in a rain shadow next to a mountain range. So, um, but it's a classic desert movie trope, at least American deserts. Um, I also wrote down another. So Phoebe's catchphrase is "at my old school," and I wrote down Keisha's because this is the first time I can recall hearing it. She probably said it in one of the previous episodes, but I didn't write it down. She says just oh bad, bad, bad." That's Keisha's catchphrase, and I really like that. Um, and uh, and so, they get to the desert, they see these animals, they see them interacting, and the whole point is the animals adapt to life in the desert. So, for instance, one of the first things they see is a roadrunner chasing a lizard, and the lizard it's a collared lizard, and it's down on all fours, and it's scurrying along, but it's not faster than the roadrunner until it gets up on its hind legs and starts running that way. And so, in order to see, well, what is it like to be a lizard? So the bus becomes a lizard, the kids are in the bus, and the roadrunner starts chasing the bus and ends up with the bus in its mouth, and the kids are afraid of being eaten, and they have been eaten now several times, and they have survived it each time. In some cases, being eaten was the whole point of the field trip, but they are still afraid of being eaten here. So the bus turns into a lizard with horns all over its body. I forget what it's called, probably a horned lizard, and the bird naturally drops it. So, that's the horns are the adaptation. They, but Phoebe has trouble seeing this because she has to in order for the episode to work, which means she tries to put a hat on a hare before learning that the huge ears of a desert hare, a desert rabbit, are the adaptations. The ears are what keep the rabbit cool. What does that say? Oh, lined paper segments. And so not all the episodes have them, but this one does. The I wrote down lined paper segments because that's essentially what they are. The screen becomes big lined paper as though they're doing a report, and then there's a little illustration of what they're trying to further illustrate, and then one of the kids is there and gives a little side lesson based on or summarizes what's been taught. And I also wrote down spontaneous overnight field trips. They must have, the parents must have, well, maybe they all had Miss Frizzle when they were kids, and so they know what's going on, but they must have all signed just blanket carte blanche permission slips because both of these episodes, the kids spend the night with their class and the bus and their teacher on whatever field trip they're on. So there must have been blanket the parents clearly are not worried because Ms. Frizzle has not been drawn and quartered. So they turn into a tortoise. Then they follow a turtle. How does the turtle survive in the desert? And they turn into a tortoise. They follow it into a burrow. And Keisha she's got this kind of ray gun thermometer that, rather like all the ray gun thermometers that everyone suddenly knew existed at the beginning of the pandemic when they were taking temperatures without things that go in your mouth. I still haven't. I gotta get one of those. Let's see. So she finds out it's much cooler in the hole underground. And if you've ever dug a deep hole, the soil on the side of the walls of your hole is nice and cool. Or if you dig a hole at the beach. Well, if you dig a hole at the beach, you eventually get to water, but the sand is nice and cool. And so it's another desert adaptation. And then, so they then emerge. Well, another tortoise pushes them out of the burrow, and it is dark, and it's much, much cooler. And this is the big key to the lesson, that desert animals survive in the desert by not, for the most part, being out during the heat of the day, but coming out in the cool evenings and doing all the things that they do at night. Now, this depends on the animal and what it needs from existence, etc. And then, well, they still have to, and Phoebe's last thing is, well, they still don't have water, so I'm going to give them our water from our little canteens into little trays, and as she's doing this, it starts to rain, and since they're small, they're tiny because they've shrunk, it's a lot of rain for them, and it's almost sweeps them away, but they all get back on the bus, and then they wake up, not on the bus, but in tents in the morning, and all in bed side by side. And what's the last thing? Oh, and then they learn. They see peckerings. I think that's what they're called, pig-like desert creatures, eating cactus, and they can see that the cactus is storing water. And then we learn in the post-show phone thing, which Phoebe handles, um, we find out that cactuses, maybe this is part of the episode, but cacti, their spines are essentially leaves, except leaves lose water, but spines don't. So that's just another. So this just changed the way that young me understood the desert, and I hadn't given it much thought before, but I haven't forgotten it since. And that is the mark of a good lesson. So as I mentioned, Phoebe handles the post-show phone thing, and just because she just happens to wander in, she kind of gets into the rolling office chair, and she puts her legs up on the desk, and so it kind of blends the. She's a character in the show, but she's also playing the character that she is in the show, but she is that character essentially because she's a little girl named Phoebe. And the person on the other end of the line pays her a compliment, I think. So the other episode, In the Haunted House, also Night at the Museum before there was Night at the Museum, the guest voice is Carol Channing, and I think maybe I didn't. In the last little video I did, I said that I recognized it even back then. I don't think I necessarily did. I maybe recognized the voice from having heard it. It was a big deal voice just in the history of voices in general, and so I probably recognized that specific voice from other things, but I probably didn't know that it was Carol Channing at the time, because I hadn't been in Hello Dolly. So the class is... the episode opens first. There's the actual opening credits theme song, and then the episode opens with the class all playing instruments, and it kind of pans across, shows them all playing their instruments, and Phoebe is on the saxophone, and when it pans past her, she stands up, and you kind of hear the saxophone, and I thought, is that the Magic School Bus animators paying a little bit of tribute to the opening of The Simpsons, and Lisa, like the full opening number, the theme song of The Simpsons features the school band, and Lisa's playing the saxophone. She stands up in every time, and it's a different saxophone solo in every episode. And Phoebe doesn't do a whole solo, but it just seems to me like they were referencing that. And by the way, just one more thing about the end of the desert episode. Carlos kind of gloats that Phoebe's been wrong this whole time about the desert needing her help. But he doesn't seem to realize he was wrong too, because he said these animals couldn't possibly survive because it's the desert and it's not a livable habitat. And so he was wrong too, but he doesn't get called for being wrong. But she gets. The whole point is that she's wrong, but he was wrong too. And so this is another Carlos episode, but it's a Carlos and D.A. kind of episode. D.A. is apparently a composer, and she's the conductor of the class band, and she wrote a concerto for invented instrument, and apparently it was up to Carlos to invent the instrument, and the journey of the episode is the instrument, no matter what he does with it, he keeps adding things to make it sound different ways, and it doesn't necessarily make sense that the thing he'd added would make it sound a certain way, but to his child brain, perhaps it does. And I just wrote down Dr. Sousaphone because it's, for one thing, because this wild, crazy-looking instrument could be a creation of Dr. Seuss, but also because I just wanted to refer to the Dr. Sousaphone at the brass workshop in Rochester, New York, where I'm from. And I wrote a little Dr. Seuss rhyme about it for Atlas Obscura a couple of years ago, and so if I remember, I'll link to that in the description below. But you can also just Google Dr. Sousaphone. I think my thing is the first thing you'll get. So let's see. So the episode, the search is the search for sound. The episode is called In the Haunted House. So they're rehearsing this because they're going to the Museum of Sound, which sounds like the sort of thing I would have written about for Atlas Obscura, and they want to debut this concerto that DA has written, um, and they're going to add this new sound to the orchestra. And it doesn't, I'll just say the end of the episode, it doesn't end up being a particularly new type of sound, but I guess as far as something that would come out of an instrument, maybe it's like a combination of things. That's not what I like about the episode. It's that payoff doesn't really pay off to me, but and the concerto is well, it's not really that original type of music. It's music that will be familiar. So they get on the bus to go, even though they haven't finished the instrument, and Carlos is still working on it. He's got a box of junk with him. He puts a hat on it, just like I think it might have been the same hat that Phoebe tried to put on the rabbit. And then someone says they need more time, and so Ms. Frizzle tells the bus to do something, and then the bus tries to do something, then it overheats, and the kids end up dragging it to the haunted house. And this, of course, looks like it's not what's supposed to happen to give them more time, but it is what gives them more time because the bus can't get them there, so they are delayed, and they therefore have more time. And Carlos continues to work on the instrument while the other kids are dragging the bus to the haunted house. And then they get to the haunted house, and they hear this eerie sound coming from it, and Carlos therefore wants to go looking for that sound because he wants to figure out how it works so that he can make his instrument do it. And DA suggests they go in and they use a phone book and call to get the bus towed and get the things they need, etc. So they go through the door, they go into the house, and they get to a room full of books, and one of them looks like a phone book. And when DA opens it, Dorothy Ann, it makes the sound of a phone. So it's a literal phone book. I think that's the sound it makes. And then they open all the other books. The other books make different sounds, including one of them screams, which is what happens in the Harry Potter movie as well. And I'm told that's a fairly old trope. The idea of books that open and they make sounds, especially books that scream. But I've only seen it in these two instances that I can recall. Carlos leads the way through the house because he's desperate to find the sound, and they come to a portrait of an old woman, Professor Cornelia Contralto, who was the owner of the house, and then she disappeared in 1892, and the house was turned into the Sound Museum. So it's got but this is in the context of the place seems to be haunted because sounds are coming from different places, and it's a sound museum, so of course. But the kids are thinking ghost, and they're thinking it's her ghost after they learn about her. So they shortly after they start learning about her, they find or they step on something that triggers a trick door that takes them into a room that has 8, as Ms. Frizzle would say, it says 8 student-sized beds and 1 teacher-sized annex, which means she gets a room to herself, and the kids all sleep in the same room. Of course, nobody sleeps because the sound keeps happening, and they go in further search of it, and they go through these rooms. One of them is like a rainforest, and then they get to like the Alps, and they hear yodeling, and that's Ms. Frizzle climbing the makeshift Alps in this room of different environmental sounds, I guess. They get to another room where with like a giant harp, a giant gong, and they learn about vibrations and how sound is this or that thing vibrating. And then they find these special glasses that enable them to see sound waves, even when they talk, but not all the time when they talk, because then the screen would be filled with the sound waves, and it would constantly be obscuring the faces of the kids and the characters, and also it would probably be very difficult for the animators. So they let's see, the house. Oh, the house also seems to have been built to uh, simulate an earthquake. The walls split. The kids fall through a they go through a door. Oh, Carlos's instrument gets stolen, and he sees that a door has been opened or something like that, and he goes in pursuit of it, and he falls through what seems to be an Alice in Wonderland type fall, and then he lands in what seems to be the Phantom of the Opera's lair. And all the kids follow. Ms. Frizzle follows. Arnold eventually follows, and Ms. Frizzle catches him. It's a nice moment. And they put the glasses back on so they can see the sound waves, and they follow where the sound waves are coming from because they see the sound waves bounce off of walls, and so they can see the sound waves coming towards them, but they can also see from where they came, and they follow them to a room with, like the Phantom's lair, a pipe organ, and then there's Carol Channing playing the great-granddaughter of Cornelia Contralto. I forget the character's name. Is it here? Carol Channing. Just look quickly at her her filmography. See if there's complete film and television, and I'll just do a quick search for Magic School Bus. Cornelia Contralto II. Although she's the great-granddaughter, so she's not exactly next in line, but she was named the second. And she's Dr. Contralto now, and she plays the organ, and she says hello in a very Hello Dolly-ish way. And I'm convinced that, just like the Lisa thing, I'm convinced that it's a reference, direct reference. And she, things turn out. She helps Carlos figure out what's going on with his instrument. He makes it the way he wants it to be, and they have their performance, and it goes well, and then she says she wants to add his instrument to her collection of sounds for the museum, which is all very well and good. And then the post-show call is taken by, we find out, it sounds like it's not Carol Channing, but it's someone trying to do a Carol Channing-ish voice, because Carol Channing was the ghost in the show. And then at the end of that segment, of course, the office chair turns around. Liz has been trying to see around, because Liz is in all of these post-show things, and Liz is trying to see who it is, because it doesn't sound quite familiar to Liz, I guess. And eventually the chair turns around, and Liz runs away because there's nobody in the chair, and the phone is being held up seemingly by nothing. So that's all dried up and in the haunted house, those Magic School Bus episodes. And let me just see if the next two will be milestone episodes for me as well. I wouldn't necessarily say, well, one of them, it's one of those memorable ones because there's a very memorable lesson in it. And, Dom DeLuise is a guest voice. And then the other one, I remember it, but I don't particularly care about it. So so neither of those, but for the most part, so far, milestone episodes, and just looking ahead, probably a few more. So, but I'm only getting to do season 1 for now. All right, seatbelts, everyone.